This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
Hey, Joe Walsh, former Congressman Joe Walsh. This is White Flag with Joe Walsh, my daily, weekly podcast. Once a week, I sit down with somebody who doesn't think like me because I think it's really boring to talk to people who think like you. The podcast is White Flag with Joe Walsh. Tell everybody you know about it. I'm really excited for this conversation because I met this young lady 3 or so weeks ago at the University of Delaware. Her name is Sara Brick. She is a freshman at the University of Delaware, and I was at the University of Delaware talking to a classroom of students and then a smaller group of students about what is wrong, what they think is wrong with American politics today, how messed up and screwed up everything seems to be. And I remember in class, when I was in Sarah's class, I did what I am kind of known to do. I took a lovable shot at Gen Z because I'm always taking shots at young people because I always want to kick young people lovingly in the butt. And my guest, Sara, responded in a really cool way to that. And I thought it would make for a really interesting conversation about Gen Z and our politics. Hey, Sara, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for that welcome.
It's so good to be with you. Let's start like this. I'm an old fart. You're a freshman in college. I think our political system is messed up. I think our politics is messed up. But I worry that Gen Z is like turning away and turning off, and they don't sufficiently get how tenuous our democracy is. Let me start with that. Respond to that, and let's start a conversation.
So I think that Gen Z would be likely to agree with you that our politics and our democracy are messed up right now, and that the situation of everything is tenuous. However, I would not agree that we're turning away. There are groups of us who have sort of disengaged from politics in some ways for some periods of time, but there are so many of us who are so politically active. We've been given the gift of social media, so a lot of us are reading and interacting on there. We're making infographics. Yeah. And for me, at least, I am not a public policy major, but I do interact with a lot of public policy majors, and I'm very politically active myself. So I get to see every day, and perhaps this is where the difference come in, the wonderful work of my peers in relationship to LGBTQ rights, women's sexual rights, gender equality. And I have a lot of faith that we're there and we're working, you know.
Gen Z strikes me as super cynical about our politics. Would you agree with that?
I believe that we can be at times, but I would also say that there's plenty to be cynical about.
Like what?
Well, we're very divided as a country right now. Some would say more divided than we've ever been. We're seeing legislation pass on both sides of the aisle that is not serving the people that it is stating that it's serving. And there's just a lot going on related to that. So I understand why my generation would want to be cynical and would want to be what they feel is truthful about the sort of state of the union.
Like Sara, I was, and again, I have to preface everything by saying I'm kind of an old fart, but when I was in your class a few weeks back, and this was a class of probably pretty highly engaged, right? Politically engaged young, like you. I got the overwhelming sense like Biden, Trump, I don't even know if I want to even vote. Like I heard that, and I know that's why, like, at the end of the class I kind of lost my temper and lovingly and went off in my on my thing. But I felt that, like, this sucks. I'm just screw it. I'm just gonna go do my thing and live my life. Is that fair? Like, I got that.
There are definitely members of Gen Z that feel that way. But I think what's important about responding to those people is understanding why they're feeling that way and why that's the response that they've chosen. I wouldn't say that it's the overwhelming response, but specifically for those people, they feel disenfranchised, so they don't they don't feel the need to work against that disenfranchisement. Um,
Why? Where does that, Sarah, by the way, Sarah, where does that, tell me, educate me. Why? Because I hear this and read this a lot, that Gen Z young people do feel disenfranchised. Why? Where does that come from?
well, number one, right now we're too young to run. So it's not like
Yeah.
we can see ourselves in the candidacy. And even then, the candidates that we're seeing are significantly older and are perhaps catering to an audience that is also significantly older. There's some gripes with the functioning of the system and what the popular vote is doing right now. And
Hmm.
then just involvement in state and local government is so limited. So I think there's potentially a disconnect between Gen Z's understanding of like the functioning of federalism and their feelings that they can't really do anything. I mean, I know for Delaware, we just canceled our presidential primary because we only have
Yeah.
two candidates, and that's never happened in my life. And I like that's scary for me that we didn't even need to hold a primary.
Sarah, that's crazy. When I primaried Donald Trump in 2020, the Republican Party just canceled primaries in like 22 states. Um, like, because I was a young person once. Uh, are is it fair that as you get older, you kind of really appreciate this stuff, politics and how it impacts your life? Like, do you think most of your peers fully understand how politics impacts their life?
I don't think most people fully understand how politics impacts their life. So this is sort of my interesting stance on Gen Z. I feel that we're the generation of like infographics. I think
Explain that to an old jerk like me.
so. When we were in elementary school and middle school, it was the time of raising awareness. So we were consistently attending like um, school meetings where we would talk about things like consent and LGBTQ rights and all sorts of things that didn't used to be school assemblies, you know. And we were watching TV and we're seeing PSAs and we're reading infographics, and then we get into high school, and at least for me, we started creating that informational content. And where that informational content does really well is social media. So it's very short form, which means that Gen Z has been reading this like short form, digestible informational content since we were very young and perhaps younger than generations before us. So I get a little confused when people tell me that Gen Z is underinformed or not scared enough of the current political state, like we don't understand the gravity, because I feel like we are constantly being confronted with the gravity of what's happening right now, and we talk a lot about it with each other. So I don't think that's where the issue is.
Is the infographics, this fact that this, and that's interesting to me, this fact that your generation tends to get information in much more concise sound bites. I worry that, and back up with me.
Mhm.
Where does your generation get informed every day? Like, where does the typical Sarah, you're not typical, but where does the typical Gen Zer, do you think, go to find out what the fuck's happening every day?
Whatever their preferred social media outlet is. So Instagram,
Oh,
X, previously known as Twitter, TikTok, stuff like that.
is that a good thing?
It's a
It
double edged.
strikes me as it's dangerous. Not dangerous, but
No,
go ahead.
if that's your opinion, it's a double edged sword, right? That makes information highly accessible.
Yeah.
So people that are not going to be reading journals in the Times, no matter which way it goes, are still able to receive that news in a way that's consumable for them. However, taking information and making it smaller and more digestible almost always ends in some like bending of the
Yeah.
information in a way that is controlled by whoever is producing that information. So while in a perfect world, we would all sit down every day and read 24 articles about world politics and domestic politics, I don't think that's realistic. So I think this has come about as a response, as like a need to stay up with things. And I think we can move towards a balance of that sort of consumption and then more traditional long form consumption.
But I feel like because Biden's so damn old and Trump is just Trump, and now we're going to be faced with it for another election. I feel this overwhelming every time I talk to someone in Gen Z, just an overwhelming of, oh, this fucking sucks. I'm gone for now. I hear a lot of that, and Sarah, it pisses me off because I want to say, don't you dare walk away, but I know sometimes I'm not fair enough and I'm too tough. Is it more understandable? I mean, look at you. You're how old are you? 19?
19.
This will be the first time you vote.
Second.
Second. Thank you. In a presidential election, we're faced with Trump Biden again. I think I know who you're going to vote for if you have to vote for one of those two, or you might vote for someone else. But does the fact that that's our choice bother you?
Oh, certainly. It's incredibly disheartening. But that's this choice is a function of a series of choices that already happened. And I think,
Explain that.
okay, so candidacy is a very complicated, it's a hard thing to do. I know that you've done it before. It's expensive, which means that people with wealth generally need to do it, or people that can collect wealth from interest groups, and then those interest groups are going to have influence. It's this long and arduous process of a series of systems that have existed for a very long time. And I think it's very important to get educated about those systems because there were stop signs, there were road gaps that we missed.
So that's spot on. I tweeted yesterday that something to the effect that a tired, old, atrophied, broken political system has given us this matchup again. And this system needs to be reformed. We need boom, 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 big, 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 but not right now after the election. So I agree with you. But does Gen Z understand that? A, do they understand the need for reform? And if they do think the system's so fucking broken, Sarah, I worry that they're not going to do the hard work to change and reform things.
So I
They're just
think
going to turn away, walk away.
so I think that's the disconnect, right? Because Gen Z, when having conversations with people like you, are sort of getting the message. They're like, "You're not engaged enough. You don't understand what's going on. You're, it's all right. Um, you're not involving yourself." And that's
By the way, and I hold that thought because I love where you're going. Am I typical of what you think the Gen Zer hears from other generations? Like, come on.
yeah, most of the time. which is super fun for those of us that are politically involved, but that's okay. Um, no. So we get a lot of like, you don't understand what's going on. And for some of us, that is certainly true. But if you start with the sort of negatively connotated, like you don't understand, you're not doing the work, people aren't going to want to listen to you. And we have common ground here in that we both think that something is wrong. So let's start with something is wrong and let's talk about why it's wrong before we start associating blame with disengaging, you know?
Completely. And it reminds me, Sarah, that reminds me of an exchange I had in class with one of your fellow students, where she rightly bemoaned the fact that older generations don't understand that your generation. I found this fascinating, Sarah. I forgot who said this. One of your classmates said that your generation has never known or seen kind of a politics that actually works, where people work across the aisle and people get along and people come together to pass legislation and actually fix things, and they don't take each other's heads off. It's not super partisan. Like, that was a light bulb moment for me as I was telling you all, you don't understand. But is that true? Like, your generation, you've never really seen it work, have you?
Yeah, I believe what my classmate was talking about was the graph that everyone shows of increasing political division between
Yeah.
representatives. We've seen that graph so many times, and we see it play out every day. So it feels like working across the aisle and like this golden age of politics is sort of a story that we're told, like to go to bed at night. And we've never really seen it. So when we're calling for like a reinstitution of those values, that's really hard for people that have never seen that. And it's really hard for us to know if that's what we want.
Well, it's fascinating to me because I hear that a lot too. And I, people romantically, Sarah, look back on this golden age, and it really wasn't what everybody thinks it is. But I get your point in that things are super bad right now. Like, I was in Congress 10 years ago and it was bitter and polarized, but nothing close to this. And that was just 10 years ago. But does your generation, do you all think that there was kind of a golden age where people got along and got shit done and the system worked? Like, was there a time when you think the system worked?
I think we take hindsight is 2020, right? So we take this sort of holistic view of when the system worked, who was it working for? And there's not really a time in US history where it's worked for everyone. So even the
Right.
times, why?
No, I said right. I said right. That's okay.
So there's never been a time that it's worked for everyone. So we can't even look romantically back on those times because we're like, well, yeah, it's really easy to protect collective interest when collective interest is like 14% of the population. You know?
Is your okay, like Biden Trump, nobody's excited about it. Most young people, if they vote, are going to vote for Biden. Um, and I think I've seen polling that backs this up, that the older you are, the more you recognize what a unique threat Trump is. And I've been in front of plenty of young audiences like yours where, like, I believe Trump's an existential threat to our democracy. Younger people, even younger left of center people, Sarah, I've gotten kind of an eye roll and kind of a feeling of, look, Joe, the whole system's fucked. I know Trump's bad, but the whole system's fucked. Like, this uniqueness of what Trump is. I've found, Sarah, that young people are more likely to just laugh at Trump, whereas older people who oppose him get incensed about what he is. React to that.
Sometimes, Joe, you just gotta laugh at things. I mean,
Damn you, Sarah.
not
Like, do you find, I know Trump isn't your cup of tea at all politically. Do you find him to be an existential threat like I do, or do you find it to be just more comical?
I I don't take the same route as much of my generation. Much of my generation finds him comical because they're watching him and they're like, how could anyone?
How the fuck could anyone even, yeah.
And
So they
also,
find that comical.
not to be exclusionary, there are plenty of Gen Zers that like him, but not all of them. For me personally, I don't know what Trump is. I certainly don't want him leading my country. And I think that that's good enough for me.
It is, and I think that's a nice contextual explanation for what I said, is that they look at Trump and I get this from Gen Z and they just laugh and say, how the fuck can anybody support that? Like, what the fuck? Or I hear from a lot of Gen Z people, Sarah, that, oh my God, the fact that this guy is going to be the nominee again, that shows how fucked up the system is.
Yeah, no, I would say that there are definitely Gen Zers that hold that opinion. Um, I, yes.
What do you most care about? What is your generation? What issues does your generation most care about?
I think that's difficult for me to talk about. I have to take a step back for a moment. I was raised on the East Coast. I went to a pretty politically monotone school. I live in a very blue
Yeah.
state. I live in a very blue part of a blue state. Um, so I don't know that I've met all of Gen Z. I have had discourse with them over the internet. I can tell you what's important to me. I can tell you that I care about LGBTQ plus rights. I care about women's reproductive health. I care about equality. I care about protections of people and industries. And what is really important to me is legislation that thinks about all of the effects that it's going to have. So I just want to make sure that we take care of everybody. And I think that some Gen Zers don't have an understanding of what everybody means because politics is complicated. And we're talking about productions and unions and tax right. It's a very complicated system. So I think we just have to take a leveled and educated look at.
Do you think your generation is sufficiently informed, or do you worry they're not? I would say they're not.
And what makes you say that?
Such a great question, Sarah. And disagree with this. I worry that they do get their information in 30-second hits. And I worry that that's not really getting information. And I worry, Sarah, that they're siloed even more than the population. And the overall population siloed. But I worry that Gen Z is especially siloed because they're so cynical. They only every day go to only sources that reaffirm what they believe in, but dispute some of that.
So, not all Gen Z, obviously.
Not all, exactly.
But if we want to talk about general trends, I think that that's a possibility. I also don't think we're the only ones doing it. I think everybody is super siloed right now because the draw of receiving information that's going to affirm your self identity and your own ideas is really really compelling and it's more accessible than it's ever been. And even still, because you're consuming information, you feel informed. So you feel like you know and you understand your own world. And whether or not you actually do is entirely up for debate. This is I've been reading a lot about truth right now because I
Mm.
have the privilege and the grace to be in college. And I think that people talk about like in the world of fake news, like people saying things that are wrong. And I think what we need to remember is that truth is so elusive and it's so subjective. There are so many truths within the same um, sort of situation. So I think everybody's believing different truths right now. And the only way that we're going to solve this is by talking about the fact that it's happening. So I think the work
Hmm.
that everyone is doing right now in the political space about civil discourse and talking about
Yeah.
siloing is really only the move forward, because it's about individuals making the choice to experience that discomfort and sort of take information from a variety of places, which is a time consuming, like it's an ask. I think people in the
Oh,
political
yeah.
space need to remember that this is an ask. We are asking people to regularly, during their, 30-minute lunch break, consume information that is going to challenge their worldview instead of watching a YouTube video, you know?
You agreed with almost everything you said. There are some basic, this is part of my worry about your generation too, and this may make no sense. So slap me, Sarah, upside the head if this makes no sense. Your generation has blown me away with how tolerant you are, and that is beautiful. Us older generations are not nearly as tolerant. It's one of the things I most admire about you all. And I'm going to phrase this wrong. I worry that you're too tolerant. That doesn't sound right. In that, like, there are some basic truths. Like, there is a good and there is a bad. There is good and there is evil. There is, like, I love the fact, and talking to your generation has opened my eyes when it comes to the whole issue of gender and LGBTQ and all the rights, and completely get all of that. But I worry that the pendulum may swing too far when there's, and I'm speaking for my generation,
Yeah.
there've got to be some basic truths like, and I hear this all the time from my old supporters on the right. Joe, men are men, women are women, and then again, life is more complicated. But there's like a longing for some semblance of basic truths, and then we can kind of go our own ways. Hey, that makes sense.
It certainly makes sense from a historical and philosophical context. We've been searching for universal basic truths since we learned how to speak.
Yeah.
The problem with searching for universal basic truths is we are really bad at agreeing what they are. And there's a lot of writers that I love that are where I get my universal basic truths from. And a lot of people get theirs from texts, whether that be religious texts, philosophical texts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I just don't know that we're going to agree on what those universal truths look like. So I can agree with you that there is good and there is bad, but us agreeing on what constitutes good and bad and then agreeing with all of humanity is a daunting and, I would say, impossible task.
Interesting, Sarah. Like an example of what is bad and evil. What Hamas did on October 7th, put everything else aside, what they did on October 7th is pure evil. Like, to me, that's a basic truth. What they did on October 7th was evil. And but yet I've heard, not just from your generation, but it's more pronounced in your generation, even in a hesitancy to say that, and I'm just picking one example, a hesitancy to even agree with what I just said because, well, there's a reason, there's a justification, I get it, I understand it, they're oppressed, blah, blah, blah. When it seems like that basic truth, Sarah, we all should agree on, and then we can talk about why they did what they did on October 7th. Does that make sense?
I understand that outlook, but I also understand why some of my peers would have issues with a statement like that.
Aha, see, there you go. Gen Z. See, everybody, this is Gen Z. Continue, Sarah.
I I certainly don't, but I have spoken with people who do. Um, And I think it's because that conflict has this historical context that goes back and back and back and back and back. And it has to deal with religion and land rights. And when you're dealing with something that is so central to both peoples involved, it is very hard to name one of those peoples or actions as being inherently evil. And I think we have to find a way to talk about truths that we find to be universal in a way that's not universal, because otherwise we're not going to talk about it at all.
Fair, but like, and what you're saying is a lot of what I've heard from
Mm.
folks who don't agree with what I just said, especially young people. We need to have that conversation about what compelled Hamas to do what they did on October 7th. The only point I'm making is a basic truth, and I worry if we can't all accept this as a universal truth, that just that act, like just going and killing and raping and murdering innocent civilians, just that act is an evil act. That's all I'm saying. And agree with me on that. And then let's talk about the history and why, and let's try to fix it and all the rest. But there's, for people who are hesitant, Sarah, to even just simply say that act that day was evil. Like I have a hard time with that.
Well, let's bring it back to our consumption of 30-second media, right?
Yeah,
So we understand that statements decontextualized because we've consumed so much
yeah.
decontextualized media don't represent a real truth. And that those statements, once made, can be taken out of context and can have consequences for the rest of our lives. So I think we're a very hesitant generation to make any statement that isn't heavily contextualized. So we struggle
Hmm.
to agree on basic truths about moral good and evil because making those sorts of statements has huge consequences for everyone involved. And then I also think we would argue about the relevance of making a decontextualized statement like that. Like, we can agree that murder and rape are bad, sure. What is the relevance to the larger context?
But stop there, stop there, stop there. This is why I love you. And by the way, everybody listening to us, I don't know that she's going to, but I want Sarah to be president of this country one day. I don't think I'll convince her to do that. I think she'll probably end up on the Supreme Court. But I love to speak to this woman. But what you said right there, Sarah, we all should agree that raping and killing innocent civilians is an evil act. And then let's contextualize it, and then let's do everything you want to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
But if a people, like if young people can't even just agree with the fact, that bold statement that raping and killing innocent civilians is evil, it's bad. Like we should all agree to that before we move on.
Forgive me if I
Push back though. Push back on me if you don't, if you want.
forgive me if I misspoke. I believe I said can. We can.
You believe what? Say that
I
again.
believe I said can, in that we can agree. Should is should we agree? And I don't.
Do you think we should?
I think we should. I don't know if you're going to get my entire generation to agree with me.
Fair answer. Yeah. And so I worry about that. I worry about that. It seems like there's a fear among your generation. There's an inclination to want to recoil against what I just said. What Hamas did on October 7th is bad evil. And I sense from your generation not wanting to embrace, to agree with that.
I think that would be correct in some cases. And I think that that's because they're worried about what effect that statement will have on the whole conflict. Because adding moral distinctions to anything, any action, any people, has
That's so cool.
has
No, Sarah, it's so cool what you're saying.
repercussions for other
Continue.
people.
Adding moral distinctions does what?
It has repercussions for other people that are not outlined in the moral distinction.
It's so cool that you said that, and because my reaction is, I get that, I hear that, but like, there are moral distinctions. Like, and this, I find that, and I do find this to be a generational question because, and I've seen the data on it. The older you are, the more prone you are, the easier it is to make moral distinctions and judgment calls. But like there are moral distinctions. Like the United States of America is a flawed, imperfect. Our government is flawed and imperfect. We've fucked up. We've done bad, evil things. But I don't think our government is an evil thing. Whereas like Hamas is a terrorist organization, it's an evil thing. Boom, there's old man Joe Walsh saying that. Whereas your generation would have a problem with that distinction.
There would be some members of them that would have a problem with that, yes.
That's so. And again, I think part of that, Sarah, and I love this about your generation, is you're so tolerant and embracing. But I worry that in the extreme, there's the fear to say, to lean, something is more right than something else. Something is more wrong than something else.
I think that's a function of two sort of distinctions about Gen Z. But before I go to that, I would just like to establish, Joe, that there are probably members of your generation that would have a problem with that statement.
Completely. And Sarah, the data is, you're totally right. The data is really clear, though. Those numbers go down, shrink, the older the population. Younger people are much more hesitant to make these distinctions. You're more prone to make the distinctions the older you are. But yes, in every generation, they're there.
Yeah. So I think what sort of keeps us from quickly and easily making those moral distinctions. Number one, Gen Z is young right now, and we haven't lived as long as you have. And there's psychological basis for the crystallization of knowledge, which sort of means that we're young, so we're very flexible thinkers, and we don't know what the right answer is. Goodness, I get on things like this and I say things, and I'm like, what if in 14 years I look at this and I'm like, Sarah, what are you doing? So it's a really scary time as a young person, especially because everything lives forever. So you make a moral distinction once, there's a likelihood that you're committed to that for the rest of your life.
Okay, Miss Gen Zer, damn you, Sarah. You just made my light bulb go off again. You just educated me again. Damn you. I had never thought of it that way. Because you're younger, you don't know. And so it's harder to say that's good and that's bad. Because you're not quite sure yet. That's a nice spin, but that kind of makes some sense too. But would you also acknowledge that there's also a fear to make a moral distinction too? Like,
Yes, certainly.
Okay. But that's really interesting. That you may not know as much, and there's a recognition that you don't. How do we, your generation's cynical. Cynical is not necessarily a bad thing. How do we get over this cynicism in Gen Z?
How do we get over it? I don't know if I have the answer to that one. I think
Explore it.
I think we'd have to
What's it going to take?
I think we'd have to see change. I think in many ways I feel like Gen Z just has to get a little older. We have to graduate college. Um, we have to have the opportunities to do the internships that we want to do, to get established in the job market, God willing, buy houses, sort of get settled within the political system, and then I feel like we might be less cynical, because a lot of where our cynicism and fear is coming from is like, will I get to achieve what I want to achieve? I believe one of my fellow students was like, dude, I want a house and a good job
Yeah,
and a family, and that's all that I want from this. And that's a relatable statement. Like,
totally.
we're all going to college to become these super well educated people to go into the workforce. And we're seeing from the generation just above us that, like, maybe the workforce is not ready for us. And that's terrifying. As a,
How did Sarah? It might have been you that brought this up. Another light bulb moment for an old fart like me. I think it might have been you. How COVID has impacted your generation.
I
Get into that for
believe
me.
that was attributed to a fellow student of mine.
Okay.
It's all right. It,
Did you buy some of that? I found it interesting.
yeah, I think COVID certainly took some years of our lives. I know that there's a lot of people who look very fondly back on their like high school years,
Yeah.
and that's an interesting case anyhow. But for us, like, we were doing high school, and then we just went home for like a year and a half. We were very isolated. We were sort of forced into the online space for interaction. It was a very scary time. I know there were people's parents who were still working. There were people's parents who weren't working. There were layoffs. There was money coming from the government. It was a crazy time. And I think it happened for many of us, either in high school or in college, at a time of like real identity forming. And it's possible that some of that fear and apprehension and sort of the need to isolate, to self protect, crystallized itself into our identity as a generation. I think we're a fearful generation, and I think in many ways we are an isolated generation. And there are people that are breaking out against that. I, oh my goodness, I love the work that is being done by my peers right now. We certainly don't have the time on air, but I could list like 7 different projects that are being done by people that were juniors when I was a senior in high school, that are just they're doing amazing work, and I'm so proud of all of them. Um, yeah.
Sarah, why is you've said this 2 or 3 times now. Explain to me and my listeners, why is Gen Z such a fearful generation?
I think we've seen a lot of things to be scared about. And as I've said, we come from a generation of so much information, and we're constantly being bombarded with information. And because of the nature of the media space, that information is usually bad. Like, it's usually meant to uh, instill fear or anxiety into the viewer, because that's going to keep you on whatever you're on, to continue to view information. And I think that, like, we were handed devices like that very early. So we have a lot of exposure to that kind of content. And then I think everybody's really scared right now.
About what?
Everything. Do
Oh,
you,
no, whoa, 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 whoa. Drill down a little.
sorry.
Give me two. Give me 2 things. What are you most scared? What are people most scared about? And get more specific, because you hang out with young people. I don't. What are young people in your mind? If you had to guess, what are they mostly scared about?
I think we're scared about, as I said, our own individual futures. So, like, am I going to get a job? Will I pay off my debt if I'm in college? Slash, will I be able to get a job without going to college? Can I buy a house? Can I start a family? Do I want to start a family? All of
Okay.
those sort of universal, we've been thinking about these for years, but those questions are getting so much harder to answer in the affirmative, at least in my interpretation. And then we're also worried about the like global world in general. We're facing things like climate change and political discontent and war and global trade. Like, there's a lot going on, both as an individual and as a world community, for young people to be scared about. And we know about a lot of it.
So this then, Sarah, leads me to another criticism I have of your generation, and I hear that. I do feel an overwhelming sense of fear and concern among young people when I speak to Gen Zers. I worry that the fear is paralyzing them and or just turning them off, and they sit and they go on their phones and they do their thing and they don't take action because they're so afraid. No?
I wouldn't disagree with you in, I mean, Gen Z is very scared, and that has meant that a large portion of Gen Z is taking that action. On the flip side, there are members of Gen Z who, in reaction to that fear, are doing really important work and are doing that work loudly and proudly. So I think there's sort of a dual response. We need to amplify and uplift the voices of Gen Z who are strong and emotionally prepared and ready to take on those issues, and we need to listen to them. And for the Gen Zers that are maybe not emotionally prepared or dealing with things in their own lives, we need to talk to them and see what help they sort of need. We need to talk about mental health resources. We need to be open and honest that everyone is experiencing this fear, and then that desire to check out and go on your phone is universal and okay, but that there is resources and help out there that they can reach out to their peers that are on the picket line. And there just needs to be more connection across those two communities.
Okay, Sarah, that's another one of my old man get off my lawn pet peeves. Agree or disagree? And I know that this is a problem with all ages, but I'm going to yell.
Okay.
Young people are on their phone all the damn time. And what the fuck? I don't feel like they are conversing with people. They're just isolated and on their phones. Man, worse than older people. Go. Agree or disagree?
If I may, just as an example, I have received 30 text messages since this
See?
began, and 14 emails. But the thing about those 30 text messages is they're from 5 of my closest friends. I'm probably getting messages about tests that people are taking. So we are conversing. We're just doing it on our phones. And I think, yes.
That's a fair point. No, that's a fair point. Do you worry, though, that that's not conversing? I hear you, but do you worry that it's really not conversing?
I do worry about that to a degree, and it's not like we don't speak to each other. Again, I have the extreme privilege of attending a college right now, so I get to go to my extracurricular activities and I get to study with people in the library. So, like, I am talking with people in person. I have a wonderful roommate who we have political debates almost every day.
Does your roommate, are you and your roommate on the same page politically?
In some ways, and then not in other ways.
Okay.
No, but
Cool, but you'll have debates, you'll have
oh, of
conversations.
course. I absolutely love speaking with her about everything, and that's sort of what part of what started our friendship. We also both really like music, but
Cool.
yeah. So I think that's important, and then I think it's a convenience thing because along with the messages that I've received, I also have 6 emails that I've received since this began, and those emails are probably um, internship opportunity things, assignments, people contacting me. Like these are very important things. And I think what's happened is that there's not a divide between like a work life balance in the media space. So I'm getting information about where my class changes in the same place that I'm getting information about like how my friend did on her chemistry test. So because all of that exists in the same space, it's easy and almost the only option to interact with things in that space.
Sarah,
Mhm.
I've got 4 more questions for you, and then we're done.
Mhm.
Because I want you to get to all those emails and texts because I want you to run for president in 30 years. Um, Sometime when I was in front of your class a few weeks ago, I went off on my thing Come on, kids. I know you think you have it rough, but you don't have it like other generations. You haven't had to go off and fight in a war. You haven't lived through the Great Depression. You haven't lived with nothing. You haven't died on a battlefield. Come on, the World War One generation, the World War Two generation, the Civil War, blah 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 blah. Come on, kids. You don't know what real fucking tough, how it's really been tough for 19, 20, 21 year olds in this country in prior generations. So quit bitching and moaning and complaining about how tough you have it now. Just you, and I know everybody in class responded differently to that old man lecture of mine. What was your reaction to that? And by the way, Sarah, it was either right before or after that or near the end of class where I got in trouble by my production guys. Because remember, I came up to you, put my hand on top of your head, and did that. I've always done that stuff, but go ahead.
Yeah. My reaction in that moment, I was worried about the responses of some of my peers because I am used to hearing that sort of narrative and I can work with it. I had veterans in my family. I was part of a volunteer singing group that used to go sing at veterans homes. So
Cool.
I know them, I've spoken with them, and they're a wonderful community of people. And I think it's difficult for my generation, if you're not explicitly related to that group of people, to have that sort of context. But I also understand their response, which was just like, we went through COVID and the 2008 crash, and there's like three wars going on right now, and we're not fighting in them, sure, but we're reading about them every day. And I'm sure some of us are fighting in them, quite frankly. Um, so it was just, it feels like an apples to oranges kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
don't, in response to that, I don't know what older generations want us to do. Like, do you
Ah,
want us to go serve in a war and then come back? Because I don't think that's what you mean. I don't know if you're calling for just like a contextualized understanding. But the reality is, until we do something like that, and God willing, we won't, we're not going to have the same contextual understanding of the world as you, and you're not going to have our contextual understanding of the world.
it was just, yeah, it was just my call to your class.
Hmm.
I know you think things suck right now, and your generation has some real issues that you have to deal with, but please don't turn off and don't walk away and stay involved and stay engaged. Your country needs you. That's why I go off on a lecture like that. Um, Sarah, and don't take this wrong, I'm not talking about you, lady, I'm talking about your generation. Second question. I think your generation, Gen Z, is brilliant. You guys are brilliant. You're tolerant. You're fun. You're engaging. I think your generation is lazy. I think your generation shies away from doing the hard work necessary to get shit done. And I worry that your generation will just easily just say fuck it and sit around on their phone all day. Agree or disagree?
So I think it's really hard to be lazy
And by the way, we're stupidly generalizing, but just to make some points. Go ahead.
in the current like the world that we live in today. A lot of us are going to school. Some of us are supporting our families. Like, everyone is doing a lot of things. And I can understand why an older generation observing us on our phones would think that we're not doing anything. But so much of our work is on our phone. Like, my thing is, what do you think we're doing? Because a lot of the time, like you, we're answering emails and we're writing social media posts and we're like doing a variety of work, which just in the past would have been done on a computer. So I think that we are working really hard, and I think something that the older generation struggles to like see is mental and emotional labor. I feel like we've definitely moved into a situation where we're doing less physical labor and we're doing a
Yeah.
lot of mental and emotional labor. And that sort of unseen labor, I mean, it contributed to gender inequity. It is historically really hard to see and to value, but I would tell you that Gen Z is doing a lot of mental and emotional labor, both for ourselves and for our parents and for our siblings, like the generations above and below us. We are thinking about them. We're worried about
Yeah.
them. We're worried about our little siblings, and that's part of the work that we're doing.
I'm gonna. I may sneak in one final one, but I'm gonna close this with asking each of you and I to criticize and praise our generations. Let's start with the criticism, I want you to give me one, and I'll give me one. One criticism of my generation is we are way too fucking black and white. We're not nearly tolerant enough, and we've forgotten how to listen. Give me one criticism of Gen Z, one big one that pops out at you, Miss Sarah. See, the fact that you even have to think about it. See, this is typical Gen Z. Nothing wrong. We're perfect.
I'm not saying we're perfect. I'm saying that everybody has a reason for being the way that they are. But no, I would.
No, hey, I'm going to challenge you now, because again, this is great. I very easily will make value judgments and moral distinctions. My generation is not nearly fucking tolerant enough. We're too close-minded. I want you to make a moral distinction here. Criticize your generation. Come on, woman.
We're too afraid.
Okay, that. I like that. And is it fair to say that part of what you're saying is you're too afraid, comma, and it can too easily paralyze some people in your generation?
Sure.
Beautiful. Look at that. All right, I'm going to praise my generation. My generation, I believe, is, and I think we don't talk about this enough. Patriotism is a good thing. Blind patriotism isn't. But I love the fact that my generation, when someone sings "God Bless America," we will tear up. I fucking love that. And that's not a bad thing, and it shouldn't be made fun of. Or when I see my flag waving, man, boom, fist bump. I like the fact that our generation, the older generation, is not afraid to show that love and patriotism. I want you, Sarah, to praise your generation. What's the best thing about your generation?
I think it's probably our tolerance.
Bingo. Bingo. Hey, on that, like I'm woke Joe Walsh 7 years ago, and if you and I are talking and we're talking about gender, I'm saying, oh, what the fuck, Sarah? Come on, there are 64 different genders. Men are men, women are women. And then I opened my eyes, I listened to people, I talked to people like you, and my eyes were opened and I became woke, proudly woke. I grew. Do you worry that when it comes to gender, that the pendulum, and here, this is just you educating me. Do you worry the pendulum's going to swing too far? Does that make sense? Like I'm completely with you on 99% of all LGBTQ issues because I've gotten myself educated. But like men and women in sports, I think there needs to be conversations about how we handle that. Men and women in locker room and bathroom facilities, transgender men and women and cisgender men and women, how do we handle that? Do you worry that the pendulum could swing too far? But just respond to that.
I think it depends on what you think the pendulum's swinging too far is I think
Yeah.
if everyone in the whole world felt comfortable with the total erosion of the concept of gender, if it just ceased to exist as an identifier, as something that is a part of people's identity, fine. Okay.
That would that be going too far?
Not if everybody feels comfortable with it.
Okay.
For me, we have to talk about the difference between gender and biological sex, because biological
Exactly.
sex is a separate thing, and this is something that we struggle with in the writing of
Yeah.
our legislation because it didn't used to be an issue. Biological sex and gender are two different issues,
Completely different.
and biological sex is only relevant in like a minority of situations, and gender is relevant in the majority of situations. So in the majority of situations, if we decided like gender distinctions are no longer important to us, I'm not going to ask people what they are. People are just people. Gender does not exist, and everyone felt comfortable with that, and that was what was most affirming for everyone involved. Fine. Like fine.
Um. Oh, Sarah, don't move. What you just made me think of something real quick. Ow, damn it! I hate forgetting things. What was I going to say? Oh, okay, okay. Respond to this pet peeve that older Americans always give me. And at one time, I'd get work. When I had my right wing talk radio show, I'd go off on issues like this. Certain publications and agencies and certain government organizations, whatever, now, afraid to say pregnant women, they say pregnant people. Come on, Sarah. Let's just say that pregnant women. Why do we have to say pregnant people? I hear like something like that from all of my old farts all the time. Go.
Because pregnancy is contingent on biological sex, which is separate from gender. People of a particular biological sex can become pregnant. Those people are defined as people.
Right, but biologically, per biological sex, only the female right now can biologically have a baby,
Mm-hmm.
can get pregnant.
Yes.
But that has nothing to do with gender, is what you're saying.
It has nothing to do with the word woman as a general rule. Which, let me just say, if you are a pregnant woman
I love
and you would
this.
like
You're
to be
helping. Go.
referred to as a
Yeah.
pregnant woman, I have no problem with that. I, if I ever became pregnant, would like to be referred to as a pregnant woman. But
I'm going to call you pregnant people. I'm going to call you a pregnant person.
and that would be your prerogative.
Sarah, you and I, for the record, we hug and embrace on this. Let everybody. I totally agree. Whatever people are comfortable, like we shouldn't be offended by the phrase "pregnant women," and we shouldn't be offended by the phrase "pregnant people." Final question, Sara Brick, and please run for president in 30 years. And if you don't, I'm going to yell at you every day of your life. I'm older than you. I'm a student of history, and I am a student of our government. I believe when I'm asked, am I bullish or bearish on the American experiment, I tend to be bearish in that I don't know that this wonderful thing can continue, this beautiful experiment in democracy. Sara Brick, much younger than me, are you generally bullish or bearish? Optimistic or pessimistic about this American experiment continuing?
I am forever optimistic about our Constitution. Our Constitution is a living document, and it is so. Our government is representative of the people, or at least it should be, and it has every capability of doing so because the document is written in such a way that it can be changed.
Yes.
Is it very difficult? Yes. But it was made in such a way that it could be changed. It was crafted with the idea in mind that change was possible and change was important. And I think if we were to tear that all down and rebuild it, we would have to think long and hard about what we were going to replace it with. And I don't know if there is enough love and connection and discourse amongst the country right now for
Oh, there
what
isn't.
we made next to be representative of everyone. So I think
Oh, I agree I agree with that,
good job.
Sarah. There isn't. We would not make one thing. If this thing didn't last, we'd break up into like 6 or 7 different things. That's what I'm afraid of. Sara Brick, everybody, University of Delaware. She's only a freshman. This has been great, and this has been helpful, and you're wonderful. Thank you.
And thank you too, sir.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.